In the beginning of the parsha, we have the pasuk Re'ei anochi noisin lefneichem hayoim bracha uklala. Targum Onkelos translates the words bracha uklala as birchan ulevatin, blessings and curses. Comes along Targum Yonason, and he translates it slightly different. He translates the word uklala v'chilufa. So bracha is, of course, blessings, v'chilufa, and the substitute, the exchange of the blessing. So the Rebbe asks, what's the difference of why it is that each Targum translates the word klala in his own way? Furthermore, we need to understand, because when we look in Targum Yonason itself, we'll find that although in the beginning of this parsha several times he does translate klala as v'chilufa, as the substitute for the blessings, later on when it speaks about placing the bracha and the klala on har grizim and har evil, there Targum Yonason will translate the word klala umilatataya, those that curse. So we need to understand why the difference. Another thing we need to understand is, what does chilufa even mean? Klala, we understand, is a curse. It's a standalone word. We understand what it means. Chilufa is really only saying it's a substitute for something, so it didn't really translate anything. But more importantly, the word chilufa, when you say one thing is an exchange or a substitute for something else, means that on the one hand, the two things, which one is substituting the other, on the one hand, they are different to each other, and that's why one is going to exchange the other, but as well as there is a common theme between the two, and that's why they could exchange each other. The Rebbe gives an example. We know there's a concept called chilufei oisius, that sometimes the Lashon Kodesh will use another word to exchange a word, or different letters to exchange other letters. The Rebbe gives the example over here from the Zoyar that the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya as well, that the word voed in Baruch Shem Kvod Malchusei La'olam voed exchanges the word echod in Shema Yisrael, and the way it works is because there's a certain connection between the aleph of echod and the vav of voed, why they could exchange each other. There's a connection between the other letters. In other words, there always needs to be a connection between them, and that's why one could substitute the other. But of course the question will become, when we speak about blessings and curses, they're complete opposites of each other, not one a substitute or an exchange for the other. So the first thing that Rebbe discusses is the difference between Targum Onkelos and Targum Yonason. And the Rebbe says that Targum Onkelos generally sticks to the simple meaning of the words, a simple explanation, whereas Targum Yonason is going to look into things in a little bit of a deeper level, and often quote medrashim and things like that. So Targum Onkelos, we understand, translates the word klala as levatin, which means curses. Targum Yonason, however, is bothered. We're speaking about something that's coming directly from Hashem. Nothing bad comes from Hashem. How can we possibly say that klala is curses? Hashem is giving it. And this is why Targum Yonason translates it with the word chilufa. Chilufa means, as far as the way it came from the Eibishter, only blessings are coming. What could happen is that as a result of the person's act, sometimes things can be switched. Things can be accepted and brought down in a slightly different way than it was supposed to come down originally. The Rebbe is not completely satisfied with this, because at the end of the day, the pasuk does say, "Anoichi noisein." Even the klala is coming directly from Hashem Himself. So we still need to understand, what does it mean that it's a chiluf, that it's only a substitute for the bracha. So the Rebbe again first deals with the general idea of Targum, and again going to look at a difference between Targum Onkelos and Targum Yonason. And what the Rebbe says is, we understand that the need for translating Torah is as a result of Yidden going into Galus, being in a place where Lashon Kodesh is no longer the first language. They're already in a situation of concealments, etc., etc. So we need the idea of Targum. Targum Onkelos is mainly a Targum, says the Rebbe, of the place of Bavel. Whereas Targum Yonason was a Targum within Eretz Yisrael. Bavel, as we know, is obviously a place at a much lower galus than the way things stood in Eretz Yisrael. The concealment in Bavel is a much greater one. And therefore, says the Rebbe, Onkelos looks at the idea for the Yidden in Bavel. The ideas of klala seem to be, in a very real way, the idea of curses. However, Targum Yonason, in Eretz Yisrael, things are seen on a deeper level. Things are not as dark and as concealed. There, the inner aspect of the golus, of the curses, could be seen. And therefore, over there, it's understood that it's not purely just a curse as it seems to be. But really, there's a point in the curse. There's really a deeper dimension within the curse. It's only to bring the Yidden to greater levels, to higher levels, and so on and so forth. And therefore, Targum Yonason is translating that the idea of a klala was really just switching over. The main theme of them is both the same. It just expressed itself in a different way because there's a need for the blessings to be able to come. Sometimes the Yidden need to be purified, elevated through these things that seem like punishments. And furthermore, the Rebbe says, this is even being said in the language of Targum, which means even these Yidden that can't understand Lashon Kodesh should also be able to relate to this sort of idea. Says the Rebbe, that's all true as long as we're speaking about in the beginning of the parsha with the theme of the idea of brachos and klolis, etc., etc. Once the Yidden are actually going into Eretz Yisrael, the pasuk says, when the Eibush is going to bring you into Eretz Yisrael, you need to put the blessings and the curses on Har Grizim and Har Eivo. Here, we're going to deal with the Yetzer Hara in the practical way already. Now, Targum Yonason needs to say, Malatataya, there's the concept of curses, because sometimes we need to scream on the Yetzer Hara and we need to tell him the full truth right in his face. Now, the Rebbe takes it a step even further. It's not only that when we look at the curses, we need to know what the inner meaning of them is, that it's really for the point of getting to higher levels, etc., etc. But really, it's a step further than that. It's really about that once we know the reason and the purpose of these punishments or these things that seem like curses, really this itself is going to reveal the blessings inside of them and bring out the deeper dimension of what they were all about. And the Rebbe first explains this based on the idea that, as the Alter Rebbe explains, that really all of the inyonim that seem to be negative really are on a higher level and a deeper level. They're coming from a greater chesed of Hashem, from a more concealed place. But what happens is, once the Yid himself realizes, once the Yid recognizes that this is all coming from Hashem and it was only substituting something that could have really come in a revealed way good, and we're realizing that these inyanim are coming from even a greater love, from a greater good from Hashem, because Hashem loves us so much. He's trying to bring us closer to Him. That itself will reveal the chesed in a very revealed way and bring it out b'poyel mamish in this world as well. That we should be able to see the goodness and the kindness. The Rebbe now connects this to the Haftorah of the week. And the Haftorah, we know that there are 7 weeks of comfort, 7 weeks of comfort after Tisha B'Av that goes until Rosh Hashanah. We read 7 different Haftorahs. This is following the 3 weeks of Haftorahs of punishment and etc. So the Rebbe says that the Avudraham explains to us a very, very fascinating order of the way the Haftorahs work. And we have 7 Haftorahs. And if we look at the beginning of each of the Haftorahs, there's an order of what's going on. The first Haftorah says, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. The Eibush is telling the Nevi'im to go and comfort the Yidden. So Yidden respond, and these are the words at the beginning of the next Haftorah, that the Yidden say, Azavani Hashem, Hashem has abandoned me. So when the Nevi'im come back to the Eibush, and the third Haftorah, they say, Aniya Soyar Aloinu Chama. That's the Haftorah of Parshas Re'eh. That the Yidden are not being comforted. Comes along the Eibush and says in the next Haftorah, Anoichi, Anoichi, Hu Menachemchem. Yes, I, in fact, myself will go along and I'll comfort the Yidden. And in fact, as the Rebbe explains, in an earlier part of the Sikha, the idea of Anoichi, Anoichi is even a greater level than a Matan Torah, where it's at only one Anoichi. And then so on and so forth, the Haftorahs go on, which speak about the next Haftorah says, Kumi Oiri, Kiva Oirech, and Rani Akar Aloyaloda, and Kumi Oiri, there's the Eibush speaking to the Yidden that they should rejoice and shine, and finally the Yidden say, Sois Osis, yes, I will rejoice in Hashem, etc. And the Rebbe says, seemingly, why does this whole order have to happen? Why does Hashem, who knows the future, why doesn't He just comfort them directly, and it has to be in this sort of way, that first the Nevi'im go and comfort, etc.? So the Rebbe says when Yidden are in a low state of Golus, sometimes they might be comforted by the comfort of the Nevi'im itself, as long as they're out of the Golus. But then what it could have meant is that there was a punishment, there's a trouble, there's problems, and now they're being comforted. But they didn't necessarily recognize that within the comfort itself, within the punishment, itself, is really the deepest level of Hashem's love. Come along the Yidden and say, then no, we're not being comforted. If it was such a terrible galus, there must be something much, much deeper in here. Coming from a greater place of love from the Eibishter, we're not comforted until we have Hashem himself. When the Yidden come to realize, when the Yidden admit and they realize that the purpose of the punishments, the purpose of the negativity, was only to bring out greater and deeper levels of the love of the Eibishter, that itself now causes that the Eibishter Kavayachal agrees with their argument, and when they say, that, the Yidden weren't comforted, and the Eibishter comes along himself and comforts them, until the Geula Hamitis Vashleima, when we'll see all the kindness of the Eibishter, b'toiv hanira v'hanigla.